Thank you so much. My name is Victor Mark Onyego. I'm the grants lead at African No Filter, aka the Money Man. So I bring good tidings. My panel this afternoon will examine what philanthropies, big philanthropic funders, what they look out for when they fund the creative sector, when they fund storytellers, when they fund creatives on the continent. And to join me on this exciting conversation, ladies and gentlemen, please make welcome Jessica Horn from Ford Foundation. Jessica is the Regional Director of Ford Foundation East Africa. Please, ladies and gentlemen, make welcome as well Agil Deng from Bloomberg Philanthropies. Agil is the Head of Corporate Philanthropy Africa at Bloomberg Philanthropies. And last but not the least, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and make very welcome Toyin Akini. She is the Vice President for Africa at Luminate. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Welcome, ladies. Before I start, I would like to say the three of them are funders of Africa No Filter. And a round of applause if you want to. They deserve it. And in a lot of ways, on the more serious note, they've been very instrumental to our collective accomplishments, both ourselves and yourself as grantees. And so, thank you so much once again. I'm tempted to start, Jessica, with the question around, and it's quite an obvious question. I guess the answer is hidden in plain sight already. What institutions like Ford Foundation look out for when they fund storytellers, when they fund creative organizations? And I say this because in a lot of ways, we see Ford Foundation as having set the gold standard when it comes to philanthropic funding, right? And it will be very good to get your perspectives on why you funded African No Filter and the kind of things you look out for when you fund creative organizations and storytellers on the continent.
Great, thank you so much. So the first thing I would say is the Ford Foundation actually has a mandate to end inequality through justice. So we're a justice funder. And arts has always been a part of the Ford Foundation's DNA, and particularly under the President Darren Walker, who is passionate about it and actually took all of the old art that we had, that we owned, old Picassos, old masters from Europe, sold it all, and basically populated the Ford Foundation building in New York with all of our people. So if you ever have a chance to go there, you will see them all in there on the walls. So the main thing we look out for, honestly, is artistic voice. Because we fund art in the context of social justice, it needs to be linked in some way to constituency. It needs to be linked to a conversation that is about an interest in shifting narrative and shifting power for us, because that's kind of part of our mandate. And really, the Ford Foundation offices in the regions, for the most part, fund the regions and efforts of people in the region. So in East Africa, we fund East African organizations and East African creators. So that issue is not so much of an issue for us. And it also doesn't even matter if the voice is new or old. I think it's just really more about the intentionality, the idea behind it, and the extent to which, again, it engages in contemporary questions that are ultimately about shifting power.
Thank you so much. I would like to chime in on that. Do you fund the creatives just for the sake of creativity, or they've got to align with the mission and they've got to be pushing out a certain message? You fund them purely as an instrument, as a channel for social change?
What I would say is that it's a bit of a tension because we're not an arts funder for the arts only. There are institutions like that. So what we do generally is just try to be as flexible as possible where we can. And we also realize that there are a range of, for example, we're in the actually I can't speak about it because it's a grant not yet awarded. But anyway, basically we do use sometimes arts institutions as a way to address other critical social problems, right? So artists are not just artists, they're also refugees, they're also marginalized people, and so we try and also address some of that through the funding. But like I said, as a foundation, we're not purely an arts funder. So Just Films funds documentary, partly because that's a vehicle for social justice work, but again, it has to relate in some way to the broad questions that we ask as a foundation. We're not a national endowment for the arts or, just a film fund that funds, any range of topics. But we try not to be too constraining because we also understand that donors can constrain what artists do, and then also everybody all of a sudden is like being forced to make art about, the SDGs or climate change. We understand that that's a bit of a tension. So we try to be as flexible as possible.
Thank you very much. Again, coming to you, African No Filter is a startup, in a sense. And I say this because before we started, there wasn't an African No Filter. There might have been a couple of organizations working around the same mission, but not in the same way. And so to some extent, I would say African No Filter is a startup, or was a startup at the time we started. And you saw faith in what we were doing, you developed confidence to put funding behind it. And I'm sure the questions on the minds of so many other startup organizations here would be, how importantly does your organization, and to some extent philanthropic organizations in general, how importantly do they value potential versus track record? Right, so for organizations who have not existed before, they've got the potential to do great things, but they can show you track record, they can show you results that boost your confidence to put money behind them. Like how ANF started. I mean, there wasn't anything to point to say, this is what should boost your confidence to support African No Filter. It was a new idea.
There was Darren Walker.
Okay, yeah.
And we work closely with Ford, so there was the belief in the work that we do collectively as foundations. And not to cut you off in the sense that there isn't really a criteria when you start an initiative, and I know African No Filter early on started as a fellowship, and so there was a lot of media and storytelling in addition to the arts. And when we had the ABMI in Accra, we had Africa No Filter Fellows on the main stage. So that was like early when it was still an early donor collab initiative. But just as an organization in terms of, I work at corporate, but Bloomberg Philanthropies encompasses all of our giving as an organization. And our idea is that it's to improve the lives and communities in which we live and work, right? And art has the power to transform communities, and art's an essential part of it. And I think as we see, like especially post-COVID, funding has decreased for media, funding has decreased for the arts, but it's an important part of just community engagement, owning civic spaces, owning our narrative, and so that's kind of why we support it, right? In terms of, and especially for Africa, because we have to own our narrative. We talked about, the different foods, and as a Sudanese, I was thinking, I bought bisap, kerkade, as we call it in Sudan, sorrel, but in Johannesburg, and it was like, oh, it's known in Eastern Europe as this. And I'm like, what about the rest of the the rest of Africa and the rest of, but I recognized it, right? And it's the same as when we were speaking on an earlier panel, they're talking about owning our story and understanding our culture and our origin story, right? Because there's always debates about homosexuality and when it existed in Africa. And one thing that we know in terms of food, at least I'm Dinka, right? And we borrow sugar from Arabic because that's recent, salad from Arabic, a lot of words, from things that are tea from, I guess, India, and that's recent as in 400 or 500 years. But we also have our own indigenous word for homosexuality, multiple genders, and so this isn't new to our culture. And so when people say it's new, it's not true, right? And so owning our story, owning our narrative, not just in the written form and the storytelling, but musical, journalism, physical art, public spaces, all of that is very important in terms of maintaining our humanity and maintaining our story.
So what I'm hearing is that even startup organizations have got to point to something that speaks to their competence as an organization, even if they are reaching out for funding for the first time, right?
So every donor is different. This is why we support African No Filter, in the sense that our funding goes to African No Filter, and even in your setup, I guess you can talk about it, it took a while to be able to do microgrants, right? And so for bigger foundations, I don't think we can do microgrants to individuals, but supporting initiatives like this, you have the ability to give microgrants to individual storytellers.
Splendid, thank you so much. Now to you, Toyin. So as head of grants at African No Filter, I sometimes get comments from creatives that big philanthropic organizations are guilty of looking for the easy way out, right? They spot those with potentials, those who are heading for the finish line, and those who perhaps would have gotten to the finish line without the support, and they put their money behind them. So it's looking for the lowest risk possible and looking for the easy way out and neglecting emerging platforms, emerging storytellers, their desire to experiment new ideas, their desire to fail and learn from the failure and move ahead from that. How true is this, based on your experience as Vice President at Luminate? Are big philanthropists guilty of this? Are they looking for the easy way out all the time? Where is the space for emerging platforms and storytellers to thrive?
Right, are we guilty as charged? What I would say, and maybe to comment on the first question you asked about what do philanthropic organizations look for when funding storytellers, I would like to say that philanthropies exist to support change makers and storytellers, people in the arts, civil society organizations, people in journalism, all form part of change makers and people working to improve society. One of our priorities as Luminate is building healthy information ecosystems, and within these information ecosystems, you find storytellers, you find people in the entertainment industry, you find people, civil society organizations, traditional civil society organizations, and one of the things that we look out for and emphasize is how their work is advancing certain values that should underpin societies and democratic societies. And some of these values include inclusivity, inclusive participation, freedoms, the opportunity for people to have agency and use their voice and know that they can access accurate information, just a vibrant civil society and open civil society. And so this is the context within which we fund people. Now that suggests that we fund organizations and initiatives that are vibrant. They are already in the space, and we know them because their work, what underpins their work, includes these values that I reeled out. And that's important because you want people who align with those values, and you're sure that their work will lead to certain type of changes or improvement in society. At the same time, at Luminate, we believe in imagination, we believe in innovation, and as part of our model of philanthropy, we support and we seed new organizations and initiatives, and we support them. And so what that asks of us is that we need to be nimble enough to respond to the changing context that we operate in. I mean, she talked about COVID. Between 2020 and now, our world has changed. This year alone, our world has changed, and technology is with us. It's increasingly changing the world that we live in. We live in Africa. That is the context, where in the next couple of decades, 2 out of 5 persons in this world will be African. That says something about how, as philanthropists, and as organizations generally, as storytellers, as all of us change makers should approach our work and stay nimble and adaptive and responsive to the changing context.
Thank you. One area of ambiguity, and I'll be ending with this question, and I would love to get your peculiar perspectives to this question as much as time permits. One area of ambiguity has always been around the return on investment. And I know it differs from organization to organization, but I'll start with you, Jessica. What do organizations like Ford, or what should organizations like Ford look out for when measuring and evaluating impacts from funding storytelling outfits and storytellers?
So we don't use that language of return on investments because we're a justice funder. So for us, we're interested in funding work that helps to shift power towards equality. And so we look at that in many ways. So for example, actually at the moment, I don't know, I think she's coming Sarah Way, so we supported the exhibition at Goethe Institute at the moment. Sisi Nihao, hey sis, there she is. Go and check it if you can, it's beautiful. She has a platform, African Women Photographers, and it brings together African women and non-binary people from across the continent, and she has an exhibition there. That exhibition is actually historic. Right, in terms of its presence. And it's already created a conversation in other countries and even ideas for collaboration in other regions of the world with Afro-descendant communities. So for us, those things also matter, like the texture of it also matters. It's not just about, boom, did you make money, boom, did it employ 3,000 people? For us, that's not necessarily what it's about. Is it helping nourish important conversations? Is it shifting the narrative in terms of who's speaking and what they're speaking about and what the analysis is? Is it opening new spaces? One of the things about creativity and creation is it creates space, right? Space is power, right? And so that is also interesting. Even a cipher, even the dance that they did here made a space. Guys, about in animation, we're talking about spirituality. The connection to spirit is a space, opens a space. So those are the things we're interested in, is it opening space for transformation. So at least from our perspective, that's what's interesting. And that's why the people creating are as interesting to us as what they're making, because those are the people who are also making the space and will kind of help define it and expand it and invite others in.
Okay, thank you very much for that. As it feels quite qualitative as against quantitative, and so thanks for that perspective. Agil, do you want to?
Yeah, I was going to say, I also responded. It's hard to, everybody's theory of change is different, and also it's different for the project. Because, for example, last year's Zaitsmoka, we're a founding donor of Zaitsmoka, brought 1 BCS to Africa, right? There's no number you can put across. We didn't know now it's going to be going to Basel, right? So there's so many things that happen, but it's really about creating space. And then I think what's unique to the continent is also just how things kind of run on a referral network. So once you create space for one, how do you leverage those opportunities to create space for more? And you were talking about supporting you, which is fine, that also happens, but there's also a need to support our brick and mortar cultural institutions, right? And how do we bring them into the new world? And because we're a technology company, we also find ways in which people can, and COVID helped this in terms of viewing virtually. So you don't have to be, you could be in your living room in anywhere in the continent, viewing a museum in Lagos or in Nairobi, but just how do we leverage our existing technology to bring our institutions that have always been there just forward and continue to support them while you're still looking at new opportunities to collaborate, new opportunities to showcase the work and make space, I should say, for those in creative arts.
Thank you.
Okay, if I can chime in. At Luminate, I don't think I've ever heard return on investment, and I'm looking at my colleagues at the back and wondering if I'm representing Luminate correctly. Instead, we talk about learning, we talk about progress, and these two words are important. If you look at impact, if you look at it as a journey, and so you can have impact on a spectrum, you can have impact at different points. And the things we're trying to contribute to are big things. We're building strong open societies. That is, building takes time. We're building a healthy information ecosystems. We're supporting startups, and all of this take time. And so what we do is we celebrate small wins, little wins, and I shouldn't supposed to say small wins. We celebrate wins. We celebrate wins, and we don't attach so much importance to, quantitative the numbers, the data, how many people, how many, because we believe that where we're going and how we get there, and the number of people we're able to take along with us is more important. And so it's about learning, and some of what we've learned is the value of collaboration. And so you see that this speaks to the kind of collaboration and what it can birth. Africa No Filter is one of such collaborations. What the things collaborations have birthed, and we also emphasize that amongst our partners. And we've seen a lot of improvement in society as a result and that is a return on investment.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, I love the fact you talked about wings, because we know that it is a gestation period. It takes time for these wings to unravel. And we heard earlier today in some of the panels about patient funding and patient talent. And it takes time for these things to unravel, and I'm happy your focus is more on the qualitative side of things and the way things shift and the way spaces are created and expanded and amplified. And so, thank you so much.
I just want to check it because I think, a lot of the funding from donors are government-related funding, right, on the continent, and that is always attached to constituents and taxpayers and year on year. And so I think you have us here as, foundations, philanthropy, there's a different timeline, right? And so that's why she's really saying it's mission-driven. And so there's times where we thought something's going to take a year, and it's taken 3 years, and you just go with it, right? You don't know what it's going to be like until it's done. And so it offers a little bit of flexibility, not all the flexibility in the world, but a lot more flexibility because it's not just stuck to, okay, this is the timeline we said, and by all means we have to meet this timeline. You find out that other things have to be added along the way to support the infrastructure, especially for something new, like when we were doing the Community Media Fund grants, right? These are small organizations, and sometimes it was too much money, which is okay. And sometimes they needed, 18 months, 20 months to implement instead of 12 that we thought. And so that's the type of things that, like you said, there's learnings, and we have that flexibility because we're not tied to a financial year, a government cycle.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you so much. I'll take it as your final words. Have you got have you got final words, Jessica and Toy?
Sure. So I think one of the things when we're talking about narratives and stereotypes is I think that we operate on a lot of stereotypes about donors. Some of it comes from experience and some of it comes from pain, but some of it is unhelpful because I find that if we begin a conversation that's a conversation with each other about vision, we get further. And also to just understand that again, because donors fund in a space and see a bird's eye view, they have a sense of what's missing, and they're often trying to find ways to meet it. So our sisters were talking a lot about re-granting mechanisms. We often use that because funding small things is very hard for us. We actually have really small teams. Administratively, to have a portfolio of 300 grants is just not possible. So we fund entities like DocuBox, we fund entities like Africa No Filter, because that's our amplifying mechanism. We can give you guys a really big grant, and you then pass on that money in ways that are manageable, but that also can convene spaces like this to make community. So all I would say, lastly, because we have that clock over there, is just that I would say, for the most part, in any space I go into, people don't think I'm a donor. Once I get on the stage, they realize a donor, they come up to me, they don't greet me, which is very un-African, guys. I'm like, they don't greet me, and then they basically just like, how do I get money? The reality is, the conversation is, I have this vision, what do you think? Right? And so I feel like if we can get into that space, it's going to generate more resource. And so I would love for us to shift our own conversations a little bit to be talking about what are we trying to create together in its diversities, and how can we get there? And everybody's using the resources that they have, but we can shift this whole dialogue further. Because donors don't only have money. They have access to institutions, they have access to media, they have access to networks, right, and connections. They have access to other donors. So there are a lot more things than just
funding.
How do I get across?
Thank you so much, Doi.
So I'll just add to what she said, and to say that the work that you all in this room, the work you're doing is important and amazing. And when, as Toy and as Luminate, we look at the ecosystem, we're increasingly inspired. And just to latch on to the point she made about us seeing our work within a big ecosystem of change, of contributing to something big. And so I am always open to and happy to have conversations about how to advance the field, how to do things better, what sort of partnerships and collaborations exist out there, and how we can also put our learnings. I mean, we have a lot of learning around collaborations, around opening the civic space. What tools? We know that narrative changes. We talk about narrative change, We talk about different tools and different networks that are accessible to everyone here. And I would just encourage us to talk more, and hopefully we can have more platforms and that we can have conversations like this.
Sure.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I couldn't have asked for a better panel. Thank you so much once again, and please don't forget to join the conversation. #AsWeAre, Asante Sana. Thank you.